Hello there all my lovely jewelry makers, I'm Christina of CSLdesigns and today I'm going to show you how to make this framed wire macrame bracelet. Now I just made two variations to show you some different combinations, but you can of course mix your materials however you want to. Now if you do make it, I would love to see your piece as well, so if you want to share it with me you can always tag me on social media. I'm going to leave links to the ones that I'm on in the description box down below, because I really love seeing your pieces. But if you want to learn how to make it, then keep watching. So these are the materials that we'll need. I have two different gauges of regular round copper wire here. The first one is a 0.8mm, so this is going to be the holding wire to give the piece some strength. And then I have a 0.5mm here as well, and this is going to be used for the macrame. Now the beads that I'm using are two different sizes here, so I've got some 6mm rounds. These specific ones are blue coated hematite gemstone rounds. And you just want to make sure the holes in these beads here, the 6mm rounds that you're using, are large enough to take two lengths of the 0.5mm through. And then I've got some 3mm rounds here. Now these are just silver metal spacer beads. And then we just need our findings here to be able to finish it off. So I'm using a lotto claw clasp and extended chain there, and then of course some jump rings to put it together. So you can check out the description box below the video there for the material list and also any links you might need. Otherwise, let's get all the materials ready and let's get started. Then as for the lengths of wires that we'll need, I have two lengths first of all of the 0.8mm here, so the holding wires of about 35 centimeters each. And then we'll need four lengths here of the 0.5mm, and these are about 1 meter each, and these are going to be used as the working wires to make the knots with. So I then took all my lengths of wire here and I attached them onto my mini macrame board. Now I just put all of them towards one end of the wires there in the same slot at the top. Then what I have is two lengths of the 0.5mm. I've just kind of separated out, one to either side there, and then the two 0.8mm and the remaining two 0.5mm. I've then also put in the same slot on the bottom there just for now. And then this is the first initial setup, and I just want to start making a few knots. So I'm just going to use these two lengths of the 0.5mm that I separated out to make some square knots around the remaining ones here. And that's just basic square knots. So if you're not familiar with how to make them, I have a video tutorial where I show how to make basic macrame knots that might be helpful. But then I bring my left one over, and then all these ones here in the middle are then the holding wires for now. And then I take the right one over there and then bring it underneath all of them there in the middle. Make sure you go under all of them so you don't miss any of them there. And then bring it up through the loop here on the opposite side, so that when I pull them tighter, they kind of sit like this in a pretzel shape around those wires in the middle. Now what I like to do as well before I just tighten this is the two 0.5mm wires I have as the holding wires in the middle here with the 0.8mm ones, I like to try and put them down through in between the 0.8mm, so a 0.8mm is on either side of them. Just makes it a little bit easier once we've made the initial knots here. But then otherwise tighten this nice and tight around all these holding wires. Then I take the right one over them all in the middle there, and then the left one comes over that underneath all of them in the middle, and then crossing under there to come up through the loop on the opposite side, and then bring it through. And as I'm then tightening this is now the other half of the knot. And when I tighten this, still making sure that the wires there lay in the middle, this is now one full square knot. So what I like to do is just make a few of these. So you just pick up the left one again here, just make a couple of knots after each other in the same way. So I personally like making 3 square knots here in the beginning, because then what we need to do now is on the bottom of my board here, I'm just going to kind of release all the wires because we now need to start separating them out. So I'm going to take the 0.8mm and separate them from each other. You're going to probably have one that's more towards one side and the other one more towards the other side. So just keep them like that. And what I'm going to do on the bottom here is put them into slots next to each other, just for now. So just bringing it back down. And then we also have these other two 0.5mm lengths. So there are also ones we're going to start using now. Now first of all, like I said, I just separate out the 0.8mm from each other right where they're coming out from that last knot. So just kind of push them apart a little bit, because what we need to do is have space to make knots around them individually now instead of around all of it together. So just something a bit like that. And now we're also going to start using them for these 0.5mm wires. And that's also why I wanted to try and keep them in the middle of these 2.8mm. So they end up on the inside here. So I'm going to start on one side at a time, because I'm going to use one of them towards the left with the other one that I've already been using. And then the other one will go towards the right. So that's where we're at now. So we need to start making knots. Again, just square knots around each of these 0.8mm lengths. So I'm just going to start on the left side, put the other one here out of the way. And like I said, I'm going to take the furthest left working wire and then one of the ones from the middle there. Then I'm just going to make square knots now only around this left 0.8mm. So just kind of try and ignore the other ones. So that means I bring my left one over, and then the one here from the middle, the right one, comes over that, and now I'll bring it down between the 2.8mm because I'm just focusing on this one to go underneath and up on the other side. So it's the exact same square knot that I did in the beginning. And then we pull this tight as far up as it'll go basically. So as close to the last knot that we did around all of the wires in the middle as we can get it. And then that's the first half, so we need to make the other half now. Also the same way as before. Again, make sure you just bring it up between the 2.8mm, so we're just focusing on this left one. And then pull that tight. And that's now one full square knot. Now what we need to do is continue making some square knots here, because we need to add a bit of length to this, so we can get to the point where we can start adding in our beads there, and obviously get to the main pattern as well. So I'm going to make another one, another full square knot, and this is going to be the second one. Tighten that, and then make another one again. So just keep making the square knots in the exact same way. Here you can kind of see we start to get a row of knots underneath each other coming out from the initial row that we made around all of them. And then this is going to be the third one. Make the other half. Number 3, and then we need to make another one. And also I just want to mention, every time I make a knot here, I'm just going to show you on this one, because obviously it's wire that we're working with. It reacts a bit differently than cordwood, quite differently in fact. And when I pull this tight and then when I let go, you can see obviously it's kind of misshaping the wire. So what I like to do is just always smooth it out between my hands and fingers every time I've tightened my wires here to make knots with, because then immediately it's smoothed out and then it's ready to use for the next movement already. So this is now my fourth one. Now what we need to do is just get the wires in position. So what I'm actually going to do is start another one. So just basically make the first half of the knot here. And then tighten that, but I'm now going to leave it at this, so I'm not going to complete this one. So just make that first half, and then we need to go to the other side. So we end up here, that's why I'm just doing the half of this knot now, because I want to end up with this wire that's in the middle coming out, and we have a little loop going over it. It's just my personal preference. But then also now we have the spacing right. So on the other side we do the same thing, but because of the other side, what I'm going to make sure to do is start opposite. So that means instead of starting from the left, I'm going to start with my right wire. But otherwise it's the exact same principle. And then that left one comes over and then underneath everything in the middle. And then tighten this as far as it'll go. Ideally get it to try and sit right next to the first one we made on the other side. If you need to help push it a little bit, you can do that. And then make the other half. And then otherwise you just want to do the same on this side here. So basically make 4.5 knots. So we obviously end up in the same position on both sides. So now I got both sides here to the same point, and then what we need to do is actually add in a first bead. So I've got that one ready, and it's one of the 6mm beads. So obviously the ones that are going to sit in the middle. I'm going to start with that, and what we're going to use are these two inner working wires. So what I'm going to do is take one of them first of all, get to the end, and then add my bead onto it, let it drop down the wire. Then I'm going to take the other one, get to the end of that one, and then we need to go through that same bead but in the opposite direction. So through like that, and then pull it all the way. And now this is also a little bit different because it's wires, so we do have to be just a little bit careful because obviously it can kink and it can break if it gets kinked too much. So what I'm going to do, the way that I like to do it is I kind of end up with this little loop trying to get this second wire through. So what I do is push the bead all the way down that first wire that I put through first of all, and then I start to gently pull this other length through and guiding it as well, so help pushing that loop further down and around the bead, and also to avoid it kind of getting kinked or scraped on a little bit. And then you can pull it through, and you want to make sure you give it a nice and tight tug because we don't want any wire showing on either side of the bead really. So make sure it's pulled all the way through so it sits with the knotwork there on either side right next to it. And then we have these wires that went through the bead coming out now again to either side and still coming from the middle. So now what we're going to do is pick up making knots again. So again, just start on one side. It doesn't matter what side you start on because we need to do it on both sides obviously. So I'm just going to start on the left one, and then what we need to do is make sure we start with the correct wire. So that means the wire that I was due to use next if I was going to continue making knots here before we added the bead in. So that means I need to start with the wire that's coming out from the bead. So that means the right one of these two here. Again, I'm just going to focus on making knots around this left holding wire for now. Then I make the first half of my knot, and then again we just need to be careful how we tighten this now. So what I like to do is kind of make it gradually tighter, and then I bring this wire that's coming from the left and towards the bead all the way up to sit right next to the bead there, and then I pull them tight because the bead is a little bit in the way of pulling this knot here tight. And then I bring it down towards the bottom of the bead. Now we need to make the other half, and also make sure you pull this nice and tight because also when we're doing the other side we obviously just want to make sure we don't have any bare wires showing between the bead and the knots there. If you leave it too loose, then I'm going to make the other half of it, and again just help guide your wire through. And this also, the bead is a little bit in the way when tightening this, so I like to bring it over the top of the bead, pull it nice and tight, kind of a bit over it there, and then I bring it down towards the bottom. Now what you'll find is this knot will sit a little bit differently than the one above it. So what I personally do is I grab a pair of chain nose pliers and just gently on the inner side of the knot, the side that's right next to the bead, I push it down and kind of in towards the bead just to get it a little bit more in the same position so it looks the same as the knot that's above it. So that side has now got a knot. Basically we're making these knots here also to cage the bead fully in place. I'm just going to go to the other side and also do that side. Same thing, but remember we're starting from the opposite side. So again, take the inner one, the one that's coming from the bead. Otherwise, same principle. Gradually get it a little bit tight, and then I like to bring the outer one there that's coming through to make the knot up and kind of over the bead to be able to then pull that nice and tight, and then I bring it down before I make the other half so we can get the full square knot. Bring that through again, and just like before, same principle. pull it tight, and I like to bring this inner wire up over the bead to be able to get it as tight as possible, and then I bring it back down, where I then take my chain nose and then just push that inner side of the knot down and in closer to the bead. And there we go, the bead is now fully caged in, and we've made a square knot on either side in the process of doing that. So the next thing we need to do is, before we make any more knots here, I want to add in some other beads. So I'm going to release the two holding wires from the bottom here, because that's the ones we need to add beads onto now. And what I also like to do before adding the beads, because obviously they've been a little bit misshapen from being in the slots there on the edges of the macrame board, I just smooth them out with my fingers, so it's going to be easier to get the beads on. But then you just want to kind of get the wires ready, and then I want to start adding my 3mm, so the small beads, onto these wires here, and onto both of them. So I do recommend, if you can, add, if anything, more beads that you need, so you don't have to kind of take the wires off again and smooth them out to add more if you need to. Obviously you can do that, but because you can always not use all of them, but you want to add beads, like I said, to both of the wires here, which is then going to be the part that's going to kind of frame in the beads in the middle. And then you just, as you add them, let them drop down until you've added all the beads there. So I added my beads onto the holding wires, then I've also reattached them into the same slots on the bottom. Then you can just push them down to basically get them out of the way, because obviously we're not going to use them all at the same time. We're going to gradually use them one at a time. So just have a little bit more space to work with here. And then to make the knots here, we do need to then push up one bead, so the very first one, on either side. You can just start with one at a time, doesn't really matter. And then just push them up to sit right below that previous last knot that you made. And then doing one side at a time, we need to cage in those beads there. So I'm just going to take the left side and start with the inner wire. That's the one we're due to use next to make the next knot with. Now we just kind of have that bead in between, and then make the first half of your square knot, and then make sure that bead stays up there, so when we tighten this, it gets tightened right below the bead, and that cages it in place then. And then we want to make the other half to make it a full square knot. So bring it through like this, and also tighten that in the same way. And as you can see, we now have plenty of space to tighten the knots. We don't need to worry about that 6mm bead in the middle. So that's the one side. We have that bead caged in. Same thing on the other side. Make sure it's pushed all the way up, and then make your square knot. Bring it through nice and gently. And make sure the bead stays in place. Like that. Make the other half of it like that, and tighten that as well. And you can see again, we now have our wires on either side in the same position again. And this is the position where we need to add our next 6mm bead. So I have that ready here, and it's in the same way as the first one I added in. So I just start with, I use the two inner wires there, working wires. Start with one of them, add that through the bead first of all. Let it drop down the wire to then take the other one of those two inner ones and get it through the same bead but in the opposite direction. And then gently pull it through. Bringing it closer down. And then as it's getting further down there, I'm going to also be pushing that bead all the way down. Same way as I did before, how I find it works well. And then gradually pull this loop tighter and gently as well. To make sure we don't strip the wire, but also we don't damage it in any way. And just help guide it through the bead. You can also open up the two sides a little bit. And then you just want to pull it all the way through. And you can pull from both sides then the two wires there and make it nice and tight. So again, we don't have any loose wire showing between the knots and that bead in the middle. So now this is added in, and basically what we need to do now is continue repeating what I've showed you already. So this is going to be the basic pattern, so that means I now need to make a square knot on either side again after I've added in that 6mm just like we did before to cage that in place. So just do one side at a time. Make sure you start with the inner wire, because that was the wire you're due to use next anyway for the next knot there, and then tighten it. Just like to bring it up like I mentioned before, over the bead, and then bring it down, where I can then make the other half of it. So we have a full square knot. Again, make sure whenever you're making your knots, you smooth out your wires. And this is then where I just like to push that inner part down and in towards the bead. And then what I like to do now that I'm in the pattern here, I like to kind of stay on this side while I'm at it anyway. It kind of makes it a bit quicker as well. So I just push up my 3mm round on this side straight away to then make my next knot. Because while I'm on this side, I might as well kind of do what I need to do instead of swapping back and forth too much. But obviously you can find your own rhythm and then cage that in place. In the same way as before. So we get these small beads to sit on the outside edges in between the knots really. And tighten the other half. So this side is now in position to add the next 6mm in the middle, but obviously we need to get the other side in that position as well. So remember to start from the opposite side than we did on this left side there. So that just means the inner one. You just do your first square knot to cage the 6mm in place in the middle. Bring it up, tighten that so we have no loose wire between that 6mm and the knots. Bring it down, and then I make the other half like this here. Tighten that. So that is now fully caged in, that 6mm bead. I push down that inside part of the knot, and now bring up, because I'm on this side, and obviously we need to get this side to the same place as the other side, bring up my 3mm round on that side to then just make a square knot below it so we can cage that in as well. And then they also help with spacing between the 6mm rounds in the middle there, creates nice spacing and obviously frames it in nicely as well design wise. So just like this, make the other half of it. Tighten that. And now in position to use the inner wires again to add our next 6mm rounds, and you basically just keep repeating it like this until you have the length that you need. Obviously minus also finishing off the other end and also adding your clasp as well. So now I reach the length that I want here, and I've ended up on that bead in the middle, the same one that we started out with. So I finish adding beads in this case here, and I have my wires coming out through that final bead, and we just want to start out with the same thing, making a square knot on either side here. Now what we need to do now is, because like I said, we're done adding beads in, so we now need to make this end basically the same as the other end. So that means on this side, just want to start making my square knot, and then do the other half of it, just like this. So we tighten the bead in place, but also what we need to do is, instead of obviously adding now, just push that down a bit, a bead, a 3mm around there, in my case the silver ones on the side, because I'm done with the length. We now just need to keep making knots. Now what we need is the same amount that we did in the beginning there, so this little length there, so that means we need to make 4.5 knots. So I've made my first one, I need to make another 3.5, and obviously you want to then switch over and do the same thing on the other side as well, just mirrored. Once we then have both sides done there, we need to then bring them together so we can make the last few knots around all of the holding wires. So what I'm going to do is release just first of all both of these 2.8mm wires from the bottom slots, and then you can just smooth them out. But then the reason I'm doing that is because I just want to shape this a little bit as well. So I want to kind of bring them in so they come in towards each other in the middle, and also just shape this little macrame piece kind of around that last bead, and then just bring them straight down again. Same with the other one. Round it a little bit so they end up next to each other. Just keep shaping it until you're happy with it. Then obviously bring the two wires here straight back down again to go next to each other. And also we then need to take the two inner working wires that are going right next to each other and bring them down with those two holding wires. Just keep shaping it until you're happy, like I said, and bring them down to then go back into the same slot again, just how they were originally. Something a bit like that. Because then what we need to do is bring them together by using the outer working wire on either side to make knots around all these. So we then just start making square knots again with the outer wires there around all these holding wires in the middle that we brought back together. We just tighten it all the way up until it won't go any further, as close to the previous knots there on either side that you can get. So that's the one half, and then do the other half for the first full square knot and pull it nice and tight. And you can see that helps bring them closer together as well. So what we want to do is the same amount of knots that we did in the beginning. So in my case here I'm going to do 3 in total. And when you then have your knots in place there, we can take our piece off the board. So now all that's left to do here is finish off the ends. So obviously we can also attach our clasp. And then what I'm going to do is to show you on one end here. So first of all, we have our working wires, some of the working wires coming out from that very final or first knot, whichever end you do it on. So what we need to do is finish them off first. So you're going to notice that they're coming out kind of towards different sides. So I have one here coming more towards the top here, and then one going more towards the back. So what I'm going to do is to actually follow that. So this top one I'm going to bring over to the opposite side, so it's kind of wrapping around all the wires that's running through the middle. I'm just going to flip it around and do the same with this one here, bring it to the opposite side. So basically they're running through kind of the middle of the knot. And then what I'm going to do is cut off the excess. So always, because this is wire as well, we don't need to worry about it unraveling just out of the blue, but we do want to secure it off nicely. So what I'm going to do is, whichever side you start on, cut off the excess, but leave, it's coming from this side here. Make sure we leave the length and then cut off pretty much where it hits the other side of the knot. Something like that. And then flip it around, cut that excess off as well in the same place on this side. Then I take my chain nose pliers, I grab the very end of the wire, kind of sticking out there. Then I do a little flick with my wrist inwards towards the knot. So we basically put a little bend in it. And then I just flip it around, do the same with the other one. Grab the very end of the wire that we cut down and flick it inwards towards the knot with your pliers. And then I go in and basically squeeze them in. And then make sure, just moves a little bit, that it stays laying in the middle of that knot. Because what will then happen is the end of the wire is going to get tucked back into the knot, which obviously then gets rid of the end, and it shouldn't then catch or scratch at anything. So make sure you push that down, and if you put your finger over it there, make sure you can't feel it. If you can, you just might need to tuck it in a little bit more. So that's gotten rid of 2 of those 0.5mm lengths now. Now for the remaining 2.5mm lengths, I'm just going to take my flush cutters here because they're coming out from the very end of that last or first knot and going straight out alongside the 0.8mm. So what I'm going to do is literally just go in and cut them off right where they're coming out from that knot. So you can just kind of separate it out a little bit to make sure you can get your pliers in there. And just, I like to push the back of my pliers, they're the very tip of them, down against the knot. And then just cut off that one wire. And then the same with the other one. And don't worry about it unraveling because it's wire. And these wires that I'm cutting off now, they have been used to make knots with further down here. So they're not just going to unravel, so don't worry about that. If you need to, if there's anything little left, make sure nothing is sticking out that's kind of scratchy or anything. So that's now all the 0.5mm gotten rid of, and then we have these two 0.8mm lengths left. Now what I'm going to do is finish off one of them and then use one of them to make a loop with. So we can obviously attach our clasp to that. Now it doesn't matter which one you do what with, but what I'm going to do first of all is grab one of them, like I said, and then we need to wrap this around the other one. So just bring it, kind of bend it down like this against the knot, as far down as you can get it, and then I just want to start wrapping this around the other one. Just a few times. Make sure that your wraps are nice and close to the tight next to each other. Wrap it around here, and that's going to be nice and secure enough. And then I take my flush cutters again, go in and cut off the excess close to where that last wrap is, and then make sure you squeeze it down so you don't feel it sticking out away from the wire. So that's one of them gotten rid of. Now this last one that I have left is the one I'm then obviously going to use to make my wrap loop with. So what I'm going to do is chain nose pliers, not flush cutters just yet. And I like to put it to the side and then go up a little bit from that last wrap and put my pliers there. So we have a couple of millimeters of the bare wire kind of showing before we then have a bend of about 90 degrees or so, thereabouts. Now I then take my 6-step bell making pliers. You can also use round nose pliers, it doesn't really matter. I just like using these because I can use the same step on them and make sure I get the same size loop. So place them right where the bend is and then bring the tail back around to then create a full circle like that. And then I take my chain nose again. And then we just want to use this length to wrap below the circle in that little space that we're left. So basically these wraps are going to end up meeting up with the ones we did with the other wire. And just keep wrapping until you don't have any more space. Just checking that my wraps are nice and tight. Flip it around, have a look at your piece. Something like that. And then I'm out of space, so I'm going to go in and cut off the excess. Just like before. And again, make sure that you always, when you cut off your wire, go in and just squeeze it down to just finish it off nicely. There we go. Put your finger over it. If you can't feel it, then you finished off this end. Now obviously, that's how you finish off the end here. Just go to the other end of the bracelet and then just do the same thing until we have a wrap loop on either end. So I now finished off both of the ends there, and I've also attached my clasp and extender chain. So all that's left to do is shape this so we can wear it. So you can either shape it around something that's the size shape you want it to have, like a bracelet mandrel, or you can just use your hands and fingers. So what I like to do is go into one place and start putting a gradual curve into it. Don't go into one place and just put a big bend, that'll make it out of shape. But just as you can see here, gradually curve it more and more by going from one end to the other, back and forth, until we end up bringing the two ends together there, so we can obviously use the clasp. So you then completed your bracelet and it's ready to wear. So these are the two examples that I made here, one in copper and one in silver, and then combining some different beads, just to show you can really get some different looks depending what materials that you choose to put together. And in the silver and purple one, I used all the same color of beads there, so you can really see that gives a nice elegant look. But then in the copper one, I used two different colors of beads, so it kind of makes it look like the outer smaller beads there, along with the macrame, are framing the ones in the middle. Now I would love to hear from you in the comment section down below which combination is your favourite, but otherwise I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Thank you so much for watching it, and I'll see you in the next one.